When I was a child, innocent, I went up to my mum and I said, "Mum, where were we? What happened? I'm having this terrible nightmare." She said, "What are you talking about, son?" I said, "Mum, we're sitting in the cellar. I'm sitting in your arms. And there's bombs out, Mum. There's bombs outside and we're shit scared. Mum, where were we? What happened?" My mum said I was dreaming, okay? Dreaming. But I was an innocent child having a nightmare and saying to my mum, "Mum, where were we? What happened?" And she just told me I was dreaming. And I could feel the way that my mum behaved. There was something wrong. So I just thought I was not old enough to know. So I asked her again later. And it's a moment I remember to this day as if it happened yesterday. Do you know it took 50 years before my mum told me the truth? I was drowned in a bathtub at 2 years old. And she thought I was coming back to haunt her because it was the most terrifying moment of her life in 1945 World War II when she was sitting in her mum's arms in the cellar with bombs outside. And when I explained this exactly as if I was her, through her vision and her feelings, exactly the same way, she freaked out. She thought I was coming back to haunt her because she never did anything about the guy that drowned me in a bathtub out of jealousy and spite. So she actually thought I was coming back to haunt her and never told me. Later on, she said I was a freak of nature because I told about other visions like this. And, you know, when we have genetic hereditary gene defects, my mum got bipolar 5 years later, and then 5 years later I got it as well. I cured, she didn't. So in DNA studies done, I was one of the first people that knew how to cure bipolar when they found the cure of the human conditioning because they thought it was incurable. And it's a genetic memory with genetic ancestry tools recorded with DNA today. See, when you go through something very dramatic like I did, the fact is the same guy put me in 16-hour microsurgery to my jaw at 16 months old at 4 months before this happened. So I'd gone through a lot of drama, and my real father left me before I was one because I was born and I didn't know. So my stepfather, who my mum married, he didn't know how to take me, and so I became the black sheep of the family. And as a child who doesn't know what's going on, and you've gone through a lot of trauma and you don't really trust men and you don't even realise why, but that's why, right? And I was always very aware of my stepfather as a child. There was something about him I didn't like, and he couldn't hold an intellectual conversation. He could never talk about love, compassion, or any of these things. He was always judgmental, competitive, and had too much pride because he's an atheist. And, you know, atheists are so trapped into themselves and think they're a God-given gift to mankind and always think they're better than the Joneses. Always lie, always exaggerate about who they are, where they come from, and everything about themselves. And that was my dad. And the same with my brothers, they followed his footsteps. I was different. I left school at 12 years old because I got picked on all the time as a freak of nature. Red hair and freckles with a first name Kim and couldn't speak English in Australia in 1970. I had the perfect trifecta. And I got picked on all the time. I left school about 12 years old and ended up taking drugs to numb myself because I couldn't cope. And through drugs, half my mates died on heroin, 3 died in my arms, and I took a drug overdose at 18 and flatlined. And boy, that was an experience. I walked around like a zombie for a week. From that moment onwards, I was a very bad junkie and I did everything to try and get off drugs and I couldn't get out. And then, just before I turned 20, on July the 10th, 1981, I got massively hit by a drunk driver at 100 miles an hour. The speedo jammed. Boy, they were mangled in the other car and I was lucky to walk out alive. And I went into shock. I went home and sat in my bedroom for 3.5 weeks. I was never home. I was a junkie. I went from 74 kilos down to 51 and tried to get help from the doctors. I was on methadone. I wouldn't put a needle in my arm all my mates was on heroin. And methadone was a free program and I was getting tons of it. Sadly, I became a very bad junkie on methadone on the maximum dose you could take. And I took mushrooms one day with the same dose, and that's when I flatlined at 18 years old. From that moment onwards, all I tried to do was get off drugs. And believe it or not, the car accident saved my life because I sat in my bedroom for 3 weeks and never touched drugs again. And boy, you wouldn't believe that in a million years, but I sat in my bedroom and didn't move for 3.5 weeks and I was never home. Never took drugs again. My mum was worried about me and I just said, Mum, I'm trying to get out of drugs, so I'm staying here, right, to dry out. She wore that, but that wasn't actually what was going on. You know why? I was high as a kite. And I do mean high. I was in another dimension, another world, staring into space all day and all night. And what I mean by that was we were building a house in Camira and we built a caravan with an annex, okay, but it was a solid annex. And the wood on top, the planks, they were ugly. So Dad painted black and Mum painted space on there with moons and stars, planets and all that sort of stuff. So I just laid down in my bed for 3.5 weeks staring into space, into nowhere, in dream time. But I never took drugs ever again. You know, when you go through a lot of suffering, a lot of rejection like this, I was picked on every day till I was 18 years old. And when I died, I wasn't afraid of people anymore. I was afraid of myself. And when I went through the car accident in 1981 and sat in my bedroom for 3.5 weeks, I never took drugs again. I got married and had 2 kids, couldn't hold the job down, but I started to buy and sell the most collectible car in Australia, and I did it very successfully. I created a reputation by word of mouth because I had no educational system. I realised honesty is the best policy and facing people one-on-one. But I remember something. I remember an old fellow walking in the gate one day when I was 23 and he said, Kim, let me give you a piece of advice. He was about 85 years old. He bought a car off me. He said, son, he said, let me tell you something. When a stranger comes to the door, they can manipulate your parents and think it's flat, right? But not a child. He runs a corner. He can feel the truth. He's innocent. Okay? He's innocent and he can feel the truth. He can't be manipulated. When a good person comes to the door, your child and your dog run straight toward that person. The heartbeat was running before they even open their mouth because they can feel with their sixth sense. Think about that, son. You see, I was 23 and had 2 children and dogs in my yard. And that's when he said this. He said, son, pay attention to your children and your dog. They can sense things that you can't sense. And it's funny that, because I always followed my instincts and sensed things that none of my parents did. And I could see that when I was a child. I always paid attention to my kids and my dogs that could sense things. Okay? And paid very deep attention to my dog and to my child because they can feel things. And I could feel things when I was a child so deep I could use my genetic memory. So I paid attention to my kids and brought them up differently than the way I was brought up. And but the school still got to my children to be programmed into their mind, okay, and to be competitive people, to compete in the marketing strategy. And that's what people go to school for. And that's why they go into competition, right? And into exams to compete on a marketing strategy, right? And it's a false sense of security, right? Where you go into, you know, you're after the woman, you're after the job, you're after the cars, you're after this, you're after that, and that's your whole life. And everything gets built up on what? Sentimental value. And then you get trapped in so much sentimental value for everything in your life. And you can see that affects the human condition so bad, right? With self-envy, self-pride, ego, and being so into yourself, okay, and being so competitive. When you go through life, you know, I learned a lot through my life and use honesty as the best policy and create a reputation by word of mouth. And I was known across the country in buying and selling cars and parts for GTs. and created that reputation by word of mouth. And when you learn things like this in real life, true life experience and wisdom, and not on some sort of marketing strategy, you learn a lot about life. But something funny, I went right into nightclubs, in prostitution, okay, and also drugs, became a drug lord. We made the most authentic drug in the world that takes you back in your primal state, like you see in the movie Limits, to use 100% of your brain and thinking outside the mind. Mental telepathy, years people promote you in telekinesis, levitation, spoon clock winding, folding space and time with deja vu, where you go in a time where time sits still and life preserves, we can say into the past and the future. You know, when I was a child, I told my mum about the worst moment in her life, and she thought it was a freak of nature. So, you know, when I started going to the drugs, and I was on a lot of drugs, we went into different dimension fields. You know, when you think about something, right, a lot of people are not aware of, but the Jesus revolution back in the 60s into the 70s, you know, I remember, man, most of them were on drugs, LSD, right, and they were hippies and they were wild, and they weren't ashamed of anything, right, and people were stiffs, totally stiffs, going to church with their nice shirts on and engineered the same way as everybody else is, conditioned one way or the other. And I used to think to myself, when religious people came to the door, I always gave them an opportunity to explain, like, if they could give me one confirmation of one good reason, then I'm all ears. I'm all for it. I'm open-minded. But they can never give you a genuine explanation. They just turn to the Bible with literal behavior and, you know, reading the book and telling me this says this and that says that. Oh, but this says and that says. They couldn't give me any, like, any spiritual influence, any real true life experience, right? Or any kind of confirmation. When you go through life like this, right, and you listen to people today in New Age and the awakening, the Great Awakening, I just put up 2 videos before, Awakening Mind Part 1 and Part 2. Now, this is a great explanation of a lot of things, but something is missing with these people. You know, you go through rabbit holes right up the ladder, as Plato describes in 15 books, to stick your head through the light in a tunnel, to stick your head out the cave. To know oneself is to understand yin and yang, right? Christ goes into the crossover and the cross talks back to him. That's Keanu Reeves in the Matrix that controls his vessel from the outside in, not the inside out. You see that in the movie Limits when he takes a drug, bread manna, that Christ and Moses used from a plant called mayang. He comes right out of his shell and looks back at himself. So there's 2 people there, and he comes out of his shell into his spirituality, into his primordial state, and looks back at himself. Then he can master his mind, use 100% of his brain. They're missing that concept. The mind and the brain is 2 different things. And these people that explain this great awakening with all their scientists and all their experts and all their conscious belief systems, consciousness is not the same as spirituality. The consciousness is the mind. Go look it up when it's developed by the Rockefellers in 1640. People really need to listen to this. Consciousness is a mental event, a mental process, an illusion, imagination. It's yin and yang, the front and left cortex. Mastering the mind is being in your primordial state, in your spirituality, in your soul. It's been proven that 45,000 cells in your heart chakra, your gut feeling survival mode, the very preservation mode for light, that activates 2 minus mentality, and 130 nucleoside molecules with genetic replicated in your aura clockwise. So you have mental telepathy, years people promote you in telekinesis, levitation, spoon bending, clock winding, predicting the future with deja vu and prevent what's going to happen. Clockwise. Spirituality is supernatural power. The laws of life and being in the primordial state is to understand the laws of life with the cosmic laws, with 7-fold wisdom knowledge. You can see the movie Limits, a vortex information. We call it the light bulb idea, the picture that tells you 1,000 words. You know, things that come from out of the blue. A universal codependent power with that kind of relationship. When we talk about oneself and we all in infinite one and consciousness, there's no relationships involved here that gives you the divine power to command nature. That's why none of these people in post-human stage with any of the awakening understands what they're missing. No matter what comes out of their mouth. They say, you know, you've been like this your whole life and then you've always been like this. No, we have amnesia, trapped in a reincarnation trap and keep going back with the same tools over and over. When you wake up from amnesia, the great awakening is crossing over back in your primal state. So you can master your mind and master your vessel, right? Because your vessel is like an avatar. DNA is RNA technology messenger. When you're trapped into yourself, right, and not completely aware of the influence that controls your reality with an outside influence, take a good look at how they create a hybrid. Graphene oxide gold, okay, listen to me, because you can Google it. The matrix and two-dimensional fields. So to create a hybrid, they use graphene oxide gold to conduct with the matrix, which is two outside fields, two-dimensional fields. So how does that go into what they're talking about? Because the book of creation talks about the crossover, and Christ crosses over and comes out of his mind and controls his vessel from the outside in. And the crossover is him, right, back at himself, like Keanu Reeves or the movie Limitless. The Bible explains the cross talks to him with the two angels, right, which is the two servants, yin and yang. So you control your vessel and you control yin and yang. Then you have the divine power of creation and destruction. You see, people are completely oblivious to this. When they explain it the way they do with scientific theories that aren't really facts, they don't have true life experience, wisdom and knowledge with divine power to command nature. And I do. I can do what Christ can with supernatural power and superhuman abilities in DNA in the most powerful study ever done. And as Jeremy McGrew says, there's only a handful of people live in the world that can do everything that Christ can by thinking outside the mind with their natural abilities and their natural cellular life with genetic memory with their ancestor tools, coded in their own DNA, the book of life. So it's a genetic process with DNA to think outside the mind, so you can do what Christ can more in that bloodline that Plato describes in 15 books. And the greatest philosopher in the world has been studying, and Jeremy McGriff wrote the book Freedom to Cure the Human Going to Save You Money with the correct tools. Yes, we are a loving, compassionate creature, but it's thinking instinctively, not consciousness. And every top scholar says the same thing, like the movie documentary The Matrix. Those that think instinctively tune that program, like Winofus won a Nobel Prize, who stands at Oxford University teaching the top scholars how to think instinctively with the 6th sense, 7, 8 and 9. You have 32 senses: dimensional thinking, remote viewing. What I find astonishing in all these great awakening people worldwide, in these top videos, they talk about none of these things. So they live in a comfort zone and hasn't woken up from amnesia and stuck their head out the cave. Do you know what the rebirth is? Rebirth is when your personality dies and you become your spirituality, and you completely become isolated because no one seems to get along with you because they're trapped in their mind, in mentality, in a personality, and you become spirituality. And you realize the consciousness was never aware. The mind's not aware. 40,000 cells in your heart is your brain. So to master your mind is to use your brain. And your brain is 40,000 cells in the heart chakra, right, with your body cells, with Jacob's ladder, the Neuralink, with the tree of life, with an outside influence, in the most positive fields, where you are in tune to codependent power, the EMP pulse of your biofields, biosenses, 32 senses. We live in 5 sense mentality in the mind. What about the other 32 or 27? We can only use the 6th sense 1 to 5%. Our body cells only repair at night time, in dream time. Our Aborigines live in dream time all the time and has all the genetic process and no mental disorders and no defects. They create the sacred secretion and use the 6th sense. Like Bruce Lee can mastermind by 24 and fight 12 year back karate blindfolded. So how could he beat him 7 times faster blindfolded? Because deja vu, when he's blindfolded, he uses his third eye to see the future and prevent what's going to happen. So he can block every punch blindfolded. Keanu Reeves can respond 7 times faster than anyone else who thinks in their mind, because you cross over through the light in the tunnel that Plato describes in 15 books. And Jeremy gives the top bowlers in the whole world today who studied Plato in the museum for 45 years and found the cure of every single thing we suffer from. And Jeremy Gibbs leaves the top platform in the world with the top scholars in the world. So no matter what videos come out from where, and especially from Americans, they're the ones trapped in consciousness the most with the worst gene defects and worst mental disorders when they live in this mindset. Consciousness is a mental event set up by the Rockefellers into the WF singularity. It's mentality. It's not spirituality, because if it was spirituality, they'd have mental telepathy, ESP, remote viewing, telekinesis, levitation, spoon bending, clock mining, folding space and time with deja vu, in a time where time stands still like preserves, to go into the past and the future like Christ did. And you could do a Christ can and more in your own DNA to heal people from mental disorders and DNVX and break free in the most unbelievable liberation when you cross over. The rebirth is the most incredible crossover that no one understands when you stick your head through the light in the tunnel, but you have to go through a rabbit hole. You have to use tough love and be tough and go deep. Not just live in another comfort zone with all the tools that they depend on. I can promise you, when you have the true life experience, wisdom and knowledge in such a way, you become the most wanted in the underground world, in the Star Chamber inquiry. And then they write on their reports that you've done 7 things that no one has ever done. I designed laboratory glass that took a 14-hour process down to 3.5 that no science thought of. I stamped an engine number in such a way the X-ray machine could not detect it. When they put direction microphones on me, they couldn't work out why I was 7-time person that could respond. When they put pen to paper in the courtroom, I could feel it with remote viewing and prevent what's going to happen with deja vu. And that's recorded by the biggest think tank in the Star Chamber on the Gatekeeper report, that I had the most powerful divine instrument with godlike power, like an angel watching over me. And 40 cops will die of the police force because we brought down the highest death to America, killing Muslim misfires in 30 years. That caused the Royal Commission to start regulation and the biggest DNA study ever done with DNA. And I lead the research with the Book of Life, DNA, the book Freedom by Jim McGivers, to do with Christ Can and More in 2008 when they found my DNA in a 34-year study by the biggest think tank in the world in the Star Chamber in the Gatekeeper report. So my experience goes far deeper and far beyond any scholar in the world, and there's no one else in the world like me according to all their documents, and the same with DNA study. Divine power. In 1992, Kirsty Nasty dies and flatlines from a drug overdose. Gets came back to life, taken to Ipswich Hospital. Kirsty Ashley, Ipswich Hospital, 1992. In CCTV with 7 people, she flatlines, given 0% chance of living. And when that happens, her body lifts 8 inches off the bed from one end to the other, and she comes back to life. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Writes the most powerful poem in 2003, the one and only worldwide #1 for 8 months. And they question her with the most powerful miracle ever recorded in modern history, amongst others also recorded attached to me. And in this study, they could not believe I had the power to bring someone back to life, given 0% chance of living. But here it is, the most powerful confirmation. So if you don't believe in mystery and unexplainable miracles, then understand, 3 times I brought someone back to life with the most powerful peer reports, with divine power. I'm not alone. Psychic programs, you go look at Jason Shuker, who interviewed Ray, Disclosure 1 to 6. He was working for the military with amnesia, right? In the Ultra, right? MK Ultra. We worked under the MBK Ultra, methylbenzoketone, even deeper. But what does he say? He could bring someone back to life the same way. And he wasn't the only one. In the biggest DNA study done with Jim McGivers, he wasn't the only one, nor was I. So understand this. They recorded with strange phenomena, unexplained area phenomena with the 212 phenomenon, with ancestry genetic process. On that day, a lot of people were chosen with strange phenomena, UAPs, in the 212 phenomena. A lot of people clinically dead or death experience. Went through a transformation in DNA and DNA transformation in 3.5 years. And they sat me down with the top scholars in the world because I went through this. And I was selected with a genetic process from the day I was born. And they knew that from the study since 1984, because I stamped an Indian number in 1984 the X-ray machine could not detect 5 years later. So predict the future and prevent what's going to happen. Same with the scientific class that no one ever thought of. Same with direction microphones and everything I did that no one ever thought of by the biggest think tank in the world. It means I've gone a lot deeper and got far more deeper explanations about life after life, reincarnation, and genetic process. Christ woke up at 24 and said, I'm son of David, son of Abraham, and he has that genetic process. We could tell people about things before they were born and into their future. And that's what the Bible's written on, prophecy. Each person who writes the Bible predicts things that happen 100 or 200, 300 years later. And that's why 85% of the Bible is written with deja vu and prophecy, not in visions and dreams, but in real life. These people around the world cannot predict the future, don't believe in mysterious things, so they don't go deep enough no matter what they say. Which means everybody is oppressed in that delusional state that they live in this oneness. Christ said, you can do what I can and more if you follow my footsteps. But without compassionate love and that relationship and that divine intervention and that divine power, you will never have the power that you need because you're too deep into yourself. You have to release your personality and your vessel completely and think outside the mind, right? Because then the universe talks back to you and cross over. Then you're controlling your yin. Then you become the master of your own vessel, right? With divine power to command nature. And it's limitless. As they say, it never stops. Once you cross over, it's a whole new process in a time where time since life observes, where you literally evolve non-stop with new information and light bulb idea. And the picture that tells 1,000 words with dimensional thinking and different parallel worlds. Thoth and Enoch knew how to cross over through parallel worlds and different dimensions. The only two that could, and Christ was teaching the same thing. He was a master of his own mind that knew the crossover into dimension fields. And that's why he came back and beat the resurrection. It's about the resurrection and crossing over, guys. And when you don't understand that with your mind, the mind doesn't know. It oppresses you so much, and there's nothing in grammar or religious political behavior that can teach you that. That's why Shulam Mastermind, right, Zen, Shulam Masterminds have always gone beyond because Christ went there to master his mind. First he learned reincarnation, life after life, then from the monks and the Buddhists and the Shulam Masterminds, Zen. He learned how to mastermind with Shulam Masterminds, the Tibetan monks. And that's where you learn to mastermind, right? To levitate and do things that are far beyond the mind. Believe me, guys, there's a lot more to learn and it's limitless and you never stop learning. Never stop learning. Don't ever fall into one deception. Listen to these people in these videos. They try to mix everything with consciousness and spirituality and they can't even get that part right. And when they can't get that part right, they're still living in their own truth no matter what, and they've got a lot more to learn. When you start to open up your mind so deep and go really, really deep, it's very confrontational and you've got to be tough and you've got to go through a lot of suffering to really get down the portal to go through the light at the end of the tunnel and cross over. Once you crossed over, it's a whole new way of thinking right outside the mind, and holy crap, it's a massive wow factor. But once you're in the knowing, it's only the beginning of the greatest time to be alive in a new dimension with sevenfold wisdom knowledge, to live with the tree of life and release the tree of knowledge. And when you live with the tree of life, it's about natural selection and a natural order with your natural gain of messages and supernatural. And supernatural is so far beyond the mind that you have the divine power to command nature, like the prophets in the Bible, and it's coding your DNA with genetic memory and a genetic process with your ancestors' tools. To unlock that is with the book Freedom by Gem Givers, the Holy Grail Life, and when I breathe the program, the Holy Breath of Life. We teach the genuine crossover, and then you go through a genetic transformation in your DNA where things come to you out of the blue with your own genetic memory and your own ancestor tools. We can do what Christ can and more and never suffer the consequences ever again. No more suffering. No more suffering or death experience, and preserve, self-preservation made for life. Imagine the greatest time to be alive and never suffering again, because believe me, it's right in front of your face, but you got to learn that your mind doesn't know and to think outside the mind with a natural process, a natural selection, a natural order. That's what love's all about, and sometimes it's tough love, and it has to be to get through people's thick skull, to get past the consciousness, because the conscious is not aware of the outside influence that controls their reality. And when you understand what you give consent to, and when you cross over with the most powerful divine intervention, then you get a most powerful confirmation as well. The crossover is a rebirth and a massive divine intervention that they don't talk about. Mate, it's a massive wake-up call when you cross over. Oh boy, it's a massive wow factor. And the Great Awakening is a lot deeper than that. It's a rebirth, and your personality dies literally, and you become someone else and can't communicate with people around you, right? Okay, but don't stop there, because you have the power to spread that like a virus, right, by using the quantum mechanic of relationship and being selfless, to be innocent like a child, okay, to be a father who has sacrificed every single thing for his child. The relationship is the most powerful confirmation, and when you cross over, you go right back to your innocence with the most powerful confirmation and clarification you've had in your life. And that, my friend, is a genuine divine intervention where you feel it so powerful and you realize what you're all about, who you are, why you're here, and what the meaning of life is. And then you begin to explore that wonderful God-given gift. And trust me, it's available for every human being on earth, and that's true. But it's not what people say. They've got to go deeper, because there's a lot more to it. It's through their compassionate feelings to think instinctively outside the mind with their natural process. As Winnock describes in front of the scholars at Oxford University, you can see on a YouTube video. In Top Scholars, Christ knew, and only a handful of people knew, how to think instinctively with the 6, 7, 8, 9 sense. And it's all your biofields and your senses. And they say it's not about your senses above that. Mate, you got to feel the truth with your senses, with your biofields. And when you don't use those tools correctly, right, these top scholars, right, in these beautiful videos, they're missing the most important links to understand what it's really all about. They only think they do, and they only go to another rabbit hole. And sure, ascension has a long way to go. The crossover is the most powerful inflection point with the most powerful divine dimension. And if you haven't crossed over, then you never know. Take the red pill and you can't go back, because you come out of your primal state and you won't go back in your mind ever again in personality with that grammar. Stay on the blue pill, you'll never know, because you'll never wake up from amnesia until you come out of your vessel and get pulled out of your vessel, completely out of your shell, to the light in the tunnel, as Plato describes in 15 books. And he's not the money. Christ was right, and barely no one knows. Believe me, it's a tough situation to be in, but if you don't understand the crossover, how to think outside the mind dimensionally, you'll never know, because you're limited. To be unlimited is to let go and understand there's a lot more to life than you realize, and it's dimensional thinking, mental telepathy, ESP, promote you, telekinesis, levitation, spring clock mining, folding space and time with deja vu. When they talk about monks and Buddhas and Yen, why don't they put on Shilla Mastermind, monk, right? Mastermind Xing, who harness the power? Why don't they talk to the people 257 years old persevere that can levitate a 1 ton stone? Because then they might get out of their mind, right, and realize there's a lot more to it than what they talk about. Enoch built the pyramids and levitated stones, and he wasn't the only one. Australian Aborigines, 500 years old, without any mental source in DDVX, they know exactly what they're doing and can levitate a 1 ton stone. They grow 10 times more fruit with 10 times new intensity value, because they bear the right fruit with the aura clockwise. These people do not understand the aura clockwise, okay? Not in mentality, right? They've got to learn to think outside the mind instinctively, to feel the truth and to follow the instincts like a child does, who's innocent. And that's the truth, guys. There's a lot more to learn. And if you deceive yourself with the tools that they're engineering across the world, with all the new age belief systems, they've been in post-human stage with their 24th chromosome since 1920. They lost their genetic memory, and the last human being on Earth that can use their genetic memory was born in the outback of Australia in 1960. So when you listen to these people across the world, go and test them for their 24th chromosome and their supernatural godlike power. Because you might get a shock of your life with all these people making videos around the world with top scholars and beautiful people like this. And I'm not saying they're evil. I'm saying, do you really think they know? Because I know they don't. There's a lot more to learn. Am I right?
Yes, yes.
Absolutely, guys. Don't deceive yourself and listen to people on social media platform and top scholars like this, because they're missing the point. That's why God doesn't trust any of these people, because they're too much into themselves, in their singularity, and think they're oneness with everything in the universe and all one. What a load of crap. Christ said you can do what he can do, but without the Father, you have no understanding what you're doing. And people being deceived so much in this conscious singularity by WF and the Rockefellers that it blows my mind away.
Yes.
Where's the real spirituality of this conditional? You listen to these scholars, it's very literal and conditional themselves. They're not tough guys. They don't stand against the fucking beast and the Babylonian tools that they use and depend on. That's why they can't do these things. Man, I hate hearing these people lie all the time. They've fucking got no idea in here.
Yeah.
The top scholars and teachers all over the world speak fucking shit.
Yes.
Because they're jealous, spiteful, weak little cowards that cannot use their natural abilities and their supernatural power. When we're in the biggest documents of the world with DNA, they don't fucking listen to us. They only listen to themselves. Deceiving everybody, man. And everybody goes mentally, right, mentally resonate with these fucking morons with their consciousness. And the conscious is not aware of the outside influence. I'm fucking sick of hearing these fucking scholars that's got no idea what they're doing. They're missing the point. Fucking idiots are, man, deceiving the whole world, man. Unbelievable. You know, imagine how God feels when everyone gets deceived like this. They were never chosen with a divine intervention and divine power with the UAP, unexplained aerial phenomenon. That's why they haven't got these tools. God doesn't trust them, right? He doesn't trust these species that live in this new age crap. All of them, right? They're missing the point. They cannot do what Christ can and more, can they? So they're full of BS, right? They only go to their own truth and, you know, manifest their own truth and live in that comfort zone, the whole lot of them. Not one of them can do what Christ can and more. And DNA proves it with the biggest day done with Jeremy Givers, because he said, we found the last human beings born on earth that can do every single thing that Christ can and more. And it's none of these people on screens, none of these scholars talking about awakening the mind. They're trapped in their mind, they're idiots. Because they don't listen to Jeremy Givers and the most powerful confirmation on earth with the most powerful divine intervention of hospital records and DNA studies done. And people can mastermind use 100% of their brain that they can't do. My God. Can you not see what's going on, guys? God trusts people like me 1,000 times more than any person on a screen in New Age, a great awakening, and trapped with all their scholars and all their scientific illusions, because they cannot do what Christ can and more. God cannot trust any of these people. So why the fuck would you trust these idiots that cannot do what Christ can and more and just speak shit all day like an actor? Disgusting, isn't it? People do not go back in the primal state and have any faith in people like us that can do that. Because they're that judgmental and selfish themselves. They don't like us, man. They don't fucking like us at all. They don't like the real people that are in the Christ image and very confrontational. They don't use their tools and don't depend on them. That's why they cannot do what we can do. And do you know that? Why the fuck would God trust these fucking reptilians? All full of BS, right? And all full of crap. Because you know why? They're too sensitive and highly emotional themselves, living in a bubble in a comfort zone. That's why they're that artificial. They cannot do what Christ can and we can. They just live in a delusional state, in a comfort zone. Facts?
Yes.
Mate, wake up from amnesia and the reincarnation trap and you'll understand what it's all about.